Welcome Gold participants from around the world. I'm Fleur Bickford, Program Director and MC for Gold Learning. I'm here today talking with Carolyn Hastie, who is going to be presenting for us on February 23rd at 2200 UTC with her presentation titled Aftershock, What Do We Need to Do Now We Know the Extent of Workplace Bullying in Midwifery. So Carolyn, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Blue. Lovely to be here.
And it is lovely to have you. I'm very excited about your topic, but before we start talking about that, I would love it if you could tell the delegates a little bit more about yourself and your professional journey.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Fleur. I went nursing originally. In Australia, we used to be registered nurses before we were registered midwives. You had to do nursing first, and I hadn't even thought about midwifery. And my next door neighbour, who was my best friend, had a brain tumour, and I went to visit him in hospital. And he was in Sydney. I lived in the Central Coast, which was about 100 miles away from, or kilometres away from Sydney at that. And I went down on the train to visit him, and I visited him in a hospital called St Vincent's Hospital. And I was so impressed with the way the staff treated him. He was blind, he had terrible headaches, and he had no hair from the chemotherapy. It was quite something in the 60s to be having chemotherapy. But the nurses made him laugh. And I thought, oh my God, there's my best friend, and he looks terrible and he's dying, and these women are able to make him laugh. So when Tony died, that was my decision to go nursing because I wanted to make a difference to people who were sick, as these women did for my friend. And while I was nursing and learning about nursing and exploring how to take care of people, I thought I really wanted to be a director of nursing in a small country hospital somewhere because I thought that would be a really great way to make a difference for a community. And so I did midwifery because you had to be a double certificate sister in those days to become a director of nursing. We used to call them the matrons. So I started midwifery, and I just fell in love with it. And I remember one day I was just walking down the stairs after a lecture, and I thought, this is it. All the pieces just fell into place, and I thought, this is it. This is the beginning of a human being's life, and we can make such a difference in terms of helping women and their families at this stage. So then I just stayed with midwifery, and I've been a midwife ever since, which is about since the early 70s. So it's been a long time. And one of the pivotal experiences in my nursing career was as a student nurse when a senior nurse treated me incredibly badly. She was very rude, very aggressive. And I remember standing in the pan room and crying and getting incredibly furious, thinking, I will never in my entire life treat anybody the same way as this woman has treated me. And that's become a driving force for me throughout my professional career in terms of how do we develop the skills and abilities to be the kind of people that are therapeutic for the people we look after, but also good colleagues. And my life went on, and I worked in various places. I worked in private practice for a very long time as a midwife and learnt a lot of skills. The women taught me so much, and lots of researching and reading and exploring and further education. And I came to a point where I was working in a small country town as a midwifery manager. And at one of the workshops, I met this delightful, delightful new midwife who was so enthusiastic and encouraging. This was in the middle 90s. Her name was Jodie Wright. And not long after that conference where I met Jodie, we did a workshop together about learning antenatal education. I was always updating and learning and going to different programs, trying to learn as much as I could. And I could see young Jodie was going the same way. She was incredibly enthusiastic and interested. And about 3 days later, after our first workshop, Jodie committed suicide. She was wrote in her suicide note that it was the way the management treated her and the way she was bullied at work that made her feel she could never become the kind of midwife she wanted to be. And she just felt so desperate. Her mother rang me because Jodie had talked about meeting me and the kind of things we talked about. And she wanted to understand why her daughter had killed herself. So that started a huge journey, tracking through where Jodie had worked, talking to all her colleagues, going to see the Department of Health, and eventually that hospital had a huge review and practice was changed. But that sent me on the journey of looking at even more deeply as to how we treat each other in the workplace. And so I'm still working with that, and my PhD is all about teaching and assessing teamwork skills because my thinking was and is that if we teach undergraduate students how to manage themselves in difficult environments, then they will be safe even when people treat them badly. And in fact, that's what I'm finding from the latest round of interviews with both new graduates and senior students, that they are in fact developing those skills that help them thrive and flourish in the workplace. So that's a potted version of my personal journey, Fleur.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I'm so sorry to hear about the awful experience that you had with your friend Jody, but, um, I am so thankful for the fact that you are able to be here with us for this conference to, share your knowledge with us because I think it's such an important topic. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about horizontal violence. We hear it talked about, you mention it, I think in your abstract and stuff, but what exactly does it mean?
Well, horizontal violence was first talked about by Fanon, who looked at colonization and how peasants, when they're colonized and made to work hard by the overlords, when they're raised up as managers or overseers, they become more um, more controlling and cruel than the actual overlords. And it's about really savaging the people who are in the same strata, if you like, of society, and that we internalize the oppressor. And a woman called Jo Roberts, a nurse, she actually wrote about horizontal violence back in the 90s as well. And it's an intriguing idea. More recently, people just have argued and talked about just calling it bullying, because when we use other words to describe, like difficult people, or it's just the way they are, or um, incivility, when they use those kind of words, it kind of diminishes the acts or the repeated acts or the way people go about work. It doesn't give it the full impact. But if we call it bullying, then there's no mistaking what's going on. So we've moved away, a lot of people have moved away from those other kind of terminologies like horizontal violence to really bring the full impact of what exactly it means for human beings to treat each other badly, and then what you can do about it. So there's all sorts of legal constraints now wrapped around this concept of bullying in the workplace, so that we can actually create more understanding, but also really help people understand what they can do to A, protect themselves, and B, to take action if they are subjected to any of the behaviours. The Fair Work Commission in Australia undertook a great review in 2012, 2011, 2012, and released their report in 2013, and they defined bullying as repeated unreasonable behaviour by an individual or a group, which is some places is called mobbing, towards a worker or a group of workers, and the behaviour causes a risk to health and safety. So it's the two parts of this. Some people say a one-off isn't a problem, but sometimes the one-off can be so dramatic, it can really affect somebody for a very long time, if not forever. So some people argue it can be a one-off example of being treated really badly. But under the Act and under the Fair Work Commission of Australia's definition, it's those repeated acts, and sometimes they're a bit like drops of water in a bathtub. And one of the women I worked with quite a while ago, she actually used that metaphor for how she felt, that it was that drops of water in a bathtub that gradually built up so that you were drowning. And if you think about that old saying about the frog, if there's a frog in a pot of cold water, and you slowly heat that water up, it doesn't realize it's getting hot until it expires. That's the modern concept, if you like, of what bullying is and what it means. Because if you put a frog in a boiling pan, or tried to, it'd be out of there in a heartbeat. It'd be straight out. So that's the difference, and that's the current definition and the reality of what we're looking at and dealing with and seeking to change. Because not only is it damaging for the people who are subjected to that behaviour, it also has huge implications in terms of the safety for the people we care for. Because when teams are dysfunctional, when people aren't working together well, then communication goes down, teamwork goes down, people are less likely to call people on their poor management or bad care, and less likely to report them. And so people are more at risk. The people we work for are more at risk. So you'll see that every investigation into some adverse event in healthcare, teamwork and communication are always very much a part of that, much more than incompetence or deliberate ways of causing harm.
Okay, thank you so much. It's it's fascinating to hear you talk about the kind of the history behind horizontal violence and what it means, and the impact of bullying. And unfortunately, I think we've probably all experienced it, which is part of the reason why I'm so excited for your talk and to learn more about what we can do to handle it in the workplace. So thank you so much for joining us today, Carolyn. And for our delegates who are listening, you can hear more from Carolyn on February 23rd at 2200 UTC. So we look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye for now, everyone.